What's up everyone, and welcome back to another review roundup as we recap everything we watched in the month of April. This is where we take another quick glance at shows and movies that we've discussed already on the channel and talk about the things we watched that we didn't think were worth making their own video about. April flew by for us, so this is going to be on the shorter side, as we only had time to watch 3 things that weren't discussed in other videos. So let's get right into it. This past month was a real dud for anything on the big screen, with the biggest release, Rebel Moon Part 2, not even being worthy of the big screen. There was no theatrical release for Part 2 of this shit show. In fact, there wasn't even much of anything in the way of marketing for the movie. And when you see the final product, that was probably the right choice, because Rebel Moon Part 2, the Scargiver, was laugh out loud bad. It's not a good sign when I have to repeatedly pause your epic space opera to let my laughter subside. And as expected, Snyder's baby Rebel Moon was torn to shreds by all, and everyone is hoping that the franchise will now be well and truly dead and buried. Civil War was the only theatrical release we watched this last month, and it was not the kind of movie we expected. Civil War is much less about the fracturing of America along ideological lines and what the country would look like after that, and much more about photojournalism in war zones, and kinda accidentally about war zone photojournalists being kinda shitty people. When these characters are seen putting themselves, and more importantly others, in danger, and willing to see harm befall others just in pursuit of getting the right picture, viewing this movie with a critical eye leaves you with more of a negative view of photojournalists during wartime than when you start the movie, which I don't think is what the creators were going for. But the bigger headline with Civil War is that all the trailers and posters and even the title are pretty damn misleading. The war and the details surrounding it are incredibly obscured, with the photographers being centered and in focus for this one. Now, the movie isn't quite as middle of the road politically as early reviewers made it sound. There wasn't much in the way of overt political statements made by the movie, but there's no real mystery about who the president is meant to represent. It's about as subtle as Zack Snyder's use of slow motion. But the movie was nothing like the politically charged film many were expecting, much to the dismay of quite a few people who require everything in their life to be political. Overall, we didn't think that the movie was that good, but it did actually end up giving us some pretty decent action toward the end. Although you can't help but being taken out of a movie when they propose things as unrealistic as California and Texas being on the same political wavelength, or the Canadian dollar being stronger than the US's. Just absurd. And the last film we were able to get to just for our own enjoyment was an old classic, Heat. The Pacino and De Niro-led film is a very good movie. And to make things even better, it's free on YouTube, so if you haven't seen it before, you really have no excuse. And Heat is one of those movies, as several comments alluded to, that you look back on and think, I'm not off my rocker, I'm not glorifying the past. Movies really were just better on average at that point in time. Anyway, I highly recommend it. Jumping from the big screen to the small, there were 2 TV shows we spent most of our time with this past month, in Shogun and Fallout. The former was an incredibly high-quality glance into the past as the adaptation of James Clavell's novel Shogun takes us to feudal Japan in the 1600s, a time where outside influences were beginning to gain a foothold in the isolated island nation. Shogun was a great character-driven story that had exceptional world-building and utilized great visual storytelling to transport you to this nearly fantastical place and time. And as great as it was, we still couldn't help but being left with a bitter taste in our mouths, realizing that Shogun is almost assuredly a one-and-done show, ending right where the source material does. Now, Shogun is one of the few exceptions where we think that there's a decent opportunity for the creators to push on out beyond the source material, but that opens up a whole new can of worms and is a discussion for another time. While Shogun left a lasting impact by bringing us high-quality episodes week after week for more than 2 months, Fallout, on the other hand, released its 8 episodes all at once. And while the show's reception has had a massive impact on the brand, dropping the whole season at once rather than letting the buzz about the show grow week after week was one of the few mistakes the creators made with this first season. The overnight explosion of interest in the Fallout universe and its games is proof enough about how this show was received, before even getting to the actual reviews of the show. One of the Fallout games shot up to the 3rd most concurrent players at some point just this past week, a full 3 weeks after the show aired. Now, the vast majority of players have jumped on Fallout 4 and Fallout 76, which are far from the best games in the franchise, but still, the sudden popularity speaks for itself. The show nailed the look and feel of the world of Fallout. It took its trio of central characters through some harrowing encounters in the wasteland, which fundamentally changed who they are and how they see the world, and it was just flat out entertaining. There was little to no filler, it was well acted, the effects and costumes looked incredible, and they didn't pull any punches with the gore or brutality. All around, it was a great show and a good adaptation of the game world, and as a result, the franchise has seen a massive surge of fans, both old and new. Now, for whatever reason, a few people were determined to hate this show no matter what was produced. Which is fine, no one's forcing you to like anything. But if you're going to dislike something, at least pick a valid reason. For Fallout, a lot of people jumped on it right away for violating the existing canon or retconning things previously established in the games. But after a lot of those people's opinions were put up to public scrutiny, 3 things became apparent. First off, most of the loudest people weren't as well acquainted with the lore as they thought they were. People corrected their misguided beliefs, and they were quickly dismissed. As for who was left, it's pretty much just a lot of people who, A, apparently have never heard of the idea of an unreliable narrator, or B, are making a lot of assumptions, like things the game lore never actually established and assuming things that the show hasn't actually done yet. For example, and I'm going to do what I can to avoid any spoilers here, a point of contention after the show released revolved around who's responsible for dropping the bombs in the first place. There were some people who jumped on the show right away for retconning this major part of the lore. Well, what those people thought was lore established in the games is actually just what the creator has said in an interview before. So, like it or not, that's not a retcon, by definition. Even the person being interviewed there isn't upset about the quote-unquote change, and yet people wanted to bury the show because of their own misunderstanding of the lore. If you want to dislike the show because you see this quote-unquote change as pandering to a specific foreign country and market, then be my guest. You probably have an argument there. But you're wrong to classify it as a lore violation. There most certainly are some minor retcons and deviations from the lore. But you're lying if you think that there was anything here that seriously undermined the established canon or devalued the franchise. And look no further than the recent Fallout fervor as evidence of that. Just ignore the raving reviews, the exploding player count of the games, and the creators themselves coming out and saying that all of the established canon from the games is still canon. At the end of the day, people who talk about Fallout games for a living and know far more about it than you or I ever will, loved the show, and very meticulously detailed why people are wrong about these massive retcons they got triggered over. But some people just pick weird hills to die on. What are you gonna do? The last show we got to during April was part 2 of the 2nd season of Invincible. It really didn't do much to improve on the lackluster first half of the season. And of course, this opinion is all relative to the pleasant surprise that was Season 1. But Season 2 really missed a lot with Omni-Man being absent for almost the entire season. It's a substantially different show without his presence. And there are other problems too. The main villain of Season 2 pretty much played no part in the events of the season until the final episode. So it basically just feels like another random conflict contained to one episode, dropped into an entire sea of random conflicts contained to one episode, which is all this 2nd season was. Oh, except it was also largely just about Mark's relationship with Amber, which is totally what people want to see with a show like this. Just like with the first season, there's quite a bit of good action, but without a stronger, more cohesive narrative holding the whole season together, it all feels hollow. And as I was writing this, I completely forgot about Velma, which tells you everything you need to know about Season 2 of that atrocity. The 2nd season toned down all of the shit that made it so abhorrent the first time around. Coupled with the fact that there was no marketing in the lead-up, and with all 10 episodes dropping at once, Velma Season 2 had this undeniable air of defeat hanging around it, like it didn't want to go another round with the public at large, tearing it to shreds. So chalk this one up in the win column. And that is actually everything we watched in the month of April, believe it or not. I thought I would get to watching more stuff this month, but like I said, April just seemed to fly by. What were you watching over the past month? Anything you would recommend people watch or stay away from? What did you think about any of the shows or movies we covered in this video? Let us know in the comments below. And remember to like the video and subscribe to HateWatchers for reviews of current shows and movies. Thank you for setting the world on fire during Earth Month with us today, and we'll catch you in the next one.